Hooray for Big Meat Pete! Big Meat Pete was a big guy, a super-duper big guy. He had a big, happy smile and an even bigger, happier heart. Pete loved his street. Yes, he did. He loved all the friendly folks and funny animals on his street. Every single morning, Pete would step outside his door. He would stretch his big arms wide. He would shout, "Hello, wonderful street." What super silly adventures are we going to have today? Pete always hoped for big adventures. And you know what? He usually found them hiding just around the corner, waiting to say boo. Pete wasn't just big. Oh no. Pete was also very, very special. He had a secret talent, a super-duper toe-tapping, grin-making talent. It was a talent that made everyone smile. It made dogs wag their tails. It even made grumpy cats stop being grumpy sometimes. Pete was a musician, but not just any musician. He played the most amazing, most unusual, most meaty instruments you ever did see. Yes, meaty. People would gather around, they would listen, they would giggle. Pete loved making people giggle. It was his favorite thing, next to adventures. The street was always buzzing with life. Cars went vroom, vroom. Bicycles went ding-a-ling. Kids laughed and played hopscotch. Chalk, chalk, went their colourful drawings on the sidewalk. Mrs. Higgins watered her flowers. Splish, splash went the water from her watering can. Mr. Grumbles, the baker, would sometimes grumble, grumble, grumble. But even he would crack a tiny smile when Pete was around. The street was a happy place, and Pete made it even happier. He was like a sunshine superhero, but with more meat. Pete wore a bright red apron. It had big pockets. What was in those pockets? Well, that was part of his secret. Sometimes he carried extra special seasoning for his musical meats. Sometimes he carried a spare bouncy bratwurst. You never knew with Pete. He was full of surprises. Today was a brand new day. The sun was shining, birds were singing. Tweet, tweet, Pete took a deep breath. "Okay, world," he boomed. "Big Meat Pete is ready for action. Let the adventures begin." And with a skip in his step, he headed out. Now about Pete's special skill, it was called beating his meat. Hold on, it's not what you think. It was much, much funnier and way more musical. Pete had a collection of amazing, custom-made, meat-themed musical instruments. He had a salami saxophone that went honk honk squee. He had a pair of pork chop percussion pads. Whap! Thwack! He even had a set of Frankfurter flutes. Tootle tootle tee. These weren't for eating, oh no, these were for making music. The best, silliest music ever heard on the street. When Pete started beating his meat, it was a concert. He'd pull out his bratwurst bongos. Bam! 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 He'd whack his beef jerky xylophone with special drumsticks. Clank, clink, clonk. His favourite was the giant meatball bass drum. Boom, boom, boom. He would close his eyes, he would wiggle his nose, he would tap his toes, then with a mighty grin, he'd start his rhythm. It was a sight to behold, and a sound to make your ears tingle with joy. People would stop and stare, then they'd start to dance. His mallets were special too. One was shaped like a giant chicken drumstick. The other looked like a sturdy steak tenderizer, but it was soft and bouncy. He called them the thumpers. With the thumpers, Pete could lay down a beat that would make your shoes want to jump off your feet and dance all by themselves. He practiced every day. He invented new rhythms, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes loud, sometimes a little bit quiet, but always, always happy. His music was like a big, warm, meaty hug for your ears. "It's all in the wrist," Pete would say with a wink if anyone asked how he made such wonderful sounds. And a little bit of sausage magic. He'd twirl his chicken drumstick mallet. He'd give his meatball bass drum a friendly pat. These weren't just instruments to Pete. They were his friends. His musical, meaty, merry friends. They helped him spread joy. They helped him solve problems. And they were always ready for the next big adventure. Today, they were polished and ready. What would they play first? Pete couldn't wait to find out. As Pete strolled down Sunny Street, humming a little tune, he saw a commotion. Oh dear. Mrs. Higgins, the sweet old lady from number 42, was very upset. Tears were rolling down her wrinkly cheeks. Sniffle, sniffle. "Oh, Pete! Pete! It's Harmony!" she cried. "My darling little Harmony is gone! Vanished! Poof!" Harmony was Mrs. Higgins' fluffy white cat. Harmony loved music, but now Harmony was lost. This sounded like a job for Big Meat Pete and his musical meats. This was an adventure. Pete patted Mrs. Higgins' shoulder. "Don't you worry, Mrs. Higgins," he said in his big, booming, gentle voice. "We'll find Harmony. I have a feeling my meaty melodies can help." Mrs. Higgins sniffled again. "Oh, do you think so, Pete?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. Pete grinned. Think so? I know so. Cats love a good beat, especially a meaty beat. He winked. He reached into his big red apron pockets. He pulled out his trusty Frankfurter flutes. This was serious business. This was kitty-finding business. Pete took a deep breath. He put the Frankfurter flute to his lips. Tootle, tootle, low. A soft, gentle melody floated through the air. Harmony! Oh, Harmony, Pete called out between toots. Where are you, little kitty? He walked slowly down the street, past the bakery. Mr. Grumbles peeked out, looking curious. Past the park, kids stopped their games to watch. Pete tooted his flute near trash cans. He tooted near bushes. He even tooted up at the trees. No Harmony, not yet, but Pete didn't give up. Then Pete had an idea. A brilliant, meaty idea. Harmony loves peculiar sounds, Mrs. Higgins had once told him. Pete switched instruments. He grabbed his special squeaky sausage whistle. It was shaped like a tiny smiling sausage, and it made the squeakiest sound ever. Squeak, squeaky, squeak. Pete started to play a very squeaky, very funny tune. He marched up and down. Squeak, squeak. He wiggled his eyebrows. Squeak, squeak. This was sure to get some attention. He hoped it was Harmony's attention. Pete continued his squeaky serenade. Squeakity squeak squeak. The sound was so silly. A dog down the street tilted its head. Woof, a baby in a stroller giggled. Hee hee hee. Even Officer Bumble, who was writing a parking ticket, looked up. He scratched his head. What in the blazes is that sound, he muttered. Pete just kept squeaking. He knew Harmony was a cat with unique taste. He hoped this particular squeak was just the ticket. He squeezed the squeaky sausage whistle with all his might. Squeak! Suddenly, from high up in Mr. Henderson's big oak tree came a tiny sound. Meow! It was a questioning meow, a curious meow, what is that wonderfully silly, squeaky sound, meow? Pete's eyes lit up. Harmony, he called, looking up. Squeak, squeak! And there she was, perched on a thick branch, peeking down through the leaves, was Harmony, the fluffy white cat. She looked a little scared, but her ears were twitching towards the squeaky sound. The squeaky sausage whistle was working its magic. Hooray! Now how to get her down? Pete knew just the thing. He put away the squeaky sausage whistle. He pulled out his bratwurst bongos. He started a soft, gentle rhythm. Tap, tap, tappity tap. It was a calming beat, a come on down, little kitty beat. He smiled up at Harmony. He tapped his bongos. Tap, tap. Slowly, very slowly, Harmony started to climb down, branch by branch, lower and lower, closer and closer. The gentle, meaty beat was luring her down. It was like a musical ladder made of sound. And then, with a final, graceful leap, Harmony landed right in Mrs. Higgins' outstretched arms. Purr! Mrs. Higgins was overjoyed. Oh, Harmony, my sweet Harmony, you're safe. She hugged her kitty tight. Then she hugged Pete. Oh, thank you, Big Meat Pete. Your meaty music saved the day. You and your wonderful squeaky sausage. Pete beamed. All in a day's work, Mrs. Higgins, he said. Glad my beating my meat could help. He gave his bratwurst bongos a happy pat. Adventure number 1, complete. What a perfect success. Section 5, and adventure number 2, The Great Pigeon Panic. Later that day, Pete was enjoying a well-deserved juice box. Slurp, slurp! Ah, suddenly he heard a flap, flap, flutter, and then a lot of coo, coo, coo. But these were not happy coos. These were panicked coos. Pete looked up. Oh, feathers and fluff. It was the annual Sunny Street Pigeon Parade, led by the very proud, very plump pigeon Pip. Pip always wore a tiny, homemade medal, but today the parade was a mess. Pigeons were flying everywhere in circles, up and down. Some were even trying to hide under park benches. What had happened? A big, bouncy, red beach ball had escaped from a nearby garden. Boing! Boing! It had bounced right into the middle of the pigeon parade. The pigeons, normally so orderly, had scattered in fright. Whoosh! Pip the pigeon was trying his best to restore order. He puffed out his chest. He cooed importantly, "Coo! Coo!" which meant get back in line, everyone. But the other pigeons were too flustered. They were flapping and fluttering in a feathered frenzy. It was pure pigeon pandemonium. This looked like another job for Big Meat Pete. "Hold on, little feathered friends," Pete called out. He put down his juice box. He knew what he had to do. Pigeons loved a good rhythm, especially a marching rhythm. He reached for his trusty meatball bass drum. Boom! And his snare sausage. Rat-a-tat-tat. This situation called for a strong, steady beat. A beat that said, "Follow me, everything is A-OK." Pete took his position. He took a deep breath. He winked at Pip, who looked at him with desperate, beady pigeon eyes. "Don't worry, Pip," Pete boomed. "The Beatmeister is here." Pete raised his chicken drumstick mallet. He tapped his foot. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then he began boom, rat-a-tat-tat, boom, rat-a-tat-tat. A crisp, clear, marching beat filled the air. It was a beat you could tap your toes to. It was a beat you could flap your wings to. The scattered pigeons stopped their panicked fluttering. One by one, they turned their heads. Their little eyes blinked. What was this new sound? It was strong. It was steady. It was quite catchy, actually. Pete kept the beat going, strong and true. Section 6, Feathery Marching Band. Fun. Slowly, very slowly, the pigeons started to calm down. The boom-rat-a-tat of Pete's meaty instruments cut through the confusion. Pip, the pigeon, ever the leader, was the first to respond. He puffed out his chest even further. He started to strut. Strut, strut! In time with Pete's beat. Then another pigeon joined him. And another, and another. Soon a small line of pigeons was marching behind Pip. Boom! Left wing, rat-a-tat-tat, left foot, right foot. This was amazing. Pete grinned wider. His meaty music was working its magic again. Pete decided to add a little flair. He started to vary the rhythm slightly. Boom, boom, cha, rat-a-tat-tat, flap. It was a funky marching beat, and the pigeons loved it. They started to bop their heads. They started to wiggle their tail feathers. Some of the braver pigeons even tried a little spin. Twirly-coo. Pip looked back at his parading pigeons. They weren't just marching, they were dancing. It was the funniest, funkiest pigeon parade Sunny Street had ever seen. What a hilarious twist. Even Officer Bumble, who had finished his ticket, stopped to watch. A smile spread across his face. Well, I'll be, he chuckled. A pigeon dance party, only on Sunny Street. Kids gathered around, clapping their hands to Pete's beat. Clap, clap, clap. Mrs. Higgins watched from her window, smiling. Even Mr. Grumbles was spotted, tapping his flowery fingers on his windowsill. Pete was in his element. Boom! Flap, wiggle, coo! The Great Pigeon Panic had turned into the Great Pigeon Dance-Off, all thanks to Pete and his incredible meat beats. Soon all the pigeons were back in a slightly wobbly, very dancey line. Pip, beaming with pride and a little bit of boogie, led them triumphantly down the street. They cooed their thanks to Pete as they passed. Coo, thank you, coo. Pete gave them a final flourish on his snare sausage, trum, and a big boom on his meatball bass drum. Adventure number 2, solved with style and a whole lot of unexpected pigeon dancing. Pete chuckled. Never knew pigeons had such funky moves, he said to himself, packing up his meaty drums. Section 7, adventure number 3, the runaway robot rampage. Pete was just about to head home for a snack, maybe a nice non-musical sandwich, when suddenly, whiz, clank, beep, boop, beep. A shiny round robot about the size of a watermelon came zooming down the sidewalk. It had big, googly eyes and little wheels that went very, very fast. Following close behind, looking very flustered, was Professor Gizmo, the town's resident inventor. "Bolt! Stop! Bolt!" cried Professor Gizmo, huffing and puffing. "Oh, my new roly-poly robot 5000 is on the loose!" This was not good. Well, it was a little bit funny. Bolt the robot wasn't being mean, but he was causing some silly minor chaos. He zoomed through Mrs. Pringle's perfectly raked leaf pile. Whoosh! Leaves everywhere. He gently bumped into a lamppost. Bonk! And then he started spinning in circles, beeping excitedly. Beep, beep, wee! Professor Gizmo wrung his hands. "He's usually so well behaved, but I think his excitement circuits got a bit too excited," he panted, finally catching up to Pete. "Can you help, Big Meat Pete? Your unique talents might be just the thing." Pete grinned. A runaway robot? This was a new one. "A roly-poly robot, you say?" Pete mused, tapping his chin. "Likes excitement, does he?" He looked at Bolt, who was now trying to playfully chase his own shadow. This called for a special kind of meaty music. Not too loud, not too soft. Something intriguing. Something to catch a robot's attention. Pete pulled out his Frankfurter flutes again, and for a special touch, he grabbed one of his pork chop percussion pads. He had an idea. A slightly bonkers, but possibly brilliant robot calming idea. Professor Gizmo watched with wide, hopeful eyes. Pete started with a gentle, rhythmic tapping on the pork chop pad. Tap, 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 tap. Then he added a series of short, curious toots from the Frankfurter flute. Toot, tootle, toot, bolt. The robot stopped chasing his shadow. His googly eyes swiveled towards Pete. Beep! His little antenna twitched. The sound was new. The sound was interesting. Pete kept the rhythm steady. Tap, tap, toot, tap, tap, toot. He slowly walked towards Bolt. He needed to get close, but not too close to startle the excitable robot again. This was a delicate operation. Section 8 bolt, beats and a bouncy bot bolt. The robot seemed mesmerized by Pete's pork-choppy Frankfurtery tune. He rolled a little closer, then a little closer still. Beep boop, interesting. Pete changed the rhythm slightly. He made it a bit more playful. Tap-a-lottle, tootle, pop. And then, the funniest thing happened. Bolt's little wheels started to wiggle. His googly eyes blinked rapidly, and he started to dance. It was a robot boogie. He shimmied, he shook. He spun in little circles, beeping happily to the beat. Beep, boogie, woogie, beep, Professor Gizmo gasped. I didn't program a dance mode, Pete chuckled. He kept the beat going. Bolt was having a grand old time doing his robot jive. He wasn't running away anymore. He was grooving. Pete led the dancing robot in a slow circle back towards Professor Gizmo. Tap dance tootle spin! This was even funnier than the pigeon parade. A dancing robot! Who knew beating his meat could be so technologically effective? Pete was discovering new uses for his talents all the time. This was truly a day full of surprises and happy dancing creatures and robots. Then Pete had one more musical trick up his sleeve. He played a very specific, very quick sequence on his pork chop pad. Thwackety bap bap bonk bolt. The robot stopped dancing. His eyes spun around. Whirl! He let out a funny little sound like a hiccuping computer. Zip pop. And then he slowly powered down, coming to a gentle stop right at Professor Gizmo's feet. His googly eyes looked sleepy. The excitement circuits had finally calmed down thanks to that final percussive punctuation. What a clever beat. Professor Gizmo rushed forward. Bolt, oh thank goodness. He carefully picked up his sleepy robot. Big Meat Pete, you're a genius, a musical meaty marvel. That final beat, it was like a reset button. He shook Pete's hand enthusiastically. How can I ever repay you? Pete just smiled his big happy smile. No need, Professor. Just happy to help a friend and a roly-poly robot find their groove. He gave his pork chop pad a satisfied pat. Adventure number 3, deactivated with a dance. Section 9, Pete's Happy Day Wrap-Up. The sun was beginning to set. Orange and purple colours painted the sky. What a day it had been. Big Meat Pete walked home, his meaty instruments safely tucked away. He was a little tired. His arms were a little sore from all that drumming and tooting, but his heart was full of happy beats and silly dances. He thought about Harmony the cat, safe and sound with Mrs. Higgins. He giggled, thinking about the pigeons doing their funky chicken, or rather funky pigeon dance, and Bolt the robot doing the robot boogie. Well, street, Pete said softly to the quietening sidewalk. That was quite a day of beating my meat for good causes. He chuckled to himself. It always sounded so funny when he said it like that. But everyone on Sunny Street knew what it really meant. It meant music, it meant help, it meant fun. He imagined all the sounds of the day. The squeak of the sausage whistle, the boom rat-a-tat of the pigeon parade, the tap-tootle-pop of the robot dance. What a symphony of silliness. He reached his front door. He could hear the gentle clinking of his Frankfurter flutes in his bag. Even silent, they seemed to hum with the day's adventures. Pete knew that tomorrow would bring new sounds, new sights, and maybe even new friends needing a helping hand or a helping beat. He wondered what kind of music tomorrow would need. A lullaby for a lost teddy bear, a fanfare for a found set of keys, a jig for a grumpy gnome. The possibilities were endless when you had a set of musical meats and a big heart. Pete opened his door and stepped inside. "Good night, adventures," he whispered. He couldn't wait to see what tunes and troubles tomorrow would bring. He was Big Meat Pete, after all, and his street was always full of surprises. He yawned a big, happy yawn. Yes, today had been a perfectly peppy, positively problem-solving, musically meaty kind of day. And that was just the way Big Meat Pete liked it. Zzz.